Hello, welcome to an e-demo on the network settings menu of an Illustra Pro 5MP fisheye camera. First of all, what I'm going to do here is just open up a web browser and I'm going to navigate to the IP address of my Illustra Pro camera and I'm going to log in as an admin user. Once I've logged in, I'm going to choose Setup from the top here and then I'm going to choose Network from the menu on the left hand side. You can see the first thing we're presented with is the Users submenu, and it contains, first of all, a list of all of the current users on this camera, which in this case is just the admin user. And if I want to add a new user, I'm just going to choose the Add User tab there, and I can go ahead and give them a username. I can choose their role from this drop down, and I can assign and confirm a password for them. Once I choose Apply, you'll see that the Users tab opens up again, and we have that new user added at the bottom of the table. If I want to remove any users, I can choose the delete icon here and then confirm the deletion, and that user has now been removed. If I need to change a user's password, I can do that from the Change Password tab. All I need to do is select their username from the drop down and enter their current and a new password for them. Okay, so the next menu down then is Date Time. If we just open that up, you'll see that the first thing we have is the current date and time on the camera. And then we have a toggle checkbox which allows us to toggle on and off 24-hour time. We also have a couple of drop downs which allow us to assign the date display format and the time zone which the camera is in. Once we have all those settings configured, we can then move down to the bottom here to the Set Time section, which will allow us to set the date and time on the camera. We've got two options for doing that. First of all, we have manually. If that's selected, we're going to need to assign a date and time using the drop downs below. If we choose via NTP and we have an NTP server available, we can enter that server details in this field here, and that NTP server will assign a time to the camera. Okay, so let's move on then to the TCP/IP menu, and this is where we can configure the network settings for this camera. So you can see, first of all, we have two tabs. We have an IP version 4 and an IP version 6 tab. On this V4 tab, we can enable DHCP if we have a DHCP server available, and the camera will be assigned an IP address from that server. If we don't, we can uncheck the box and we can enter the network details manually. Move over to the version 6 tab, you'll see we can enable or disable IPv6, and you can see the current address there as well. Okay, so moving on then, if we have any EAP settings to assign, we can do that using this next submenu. We then have the SMTP menu, which will allow us to set up an SMTP server for sending of emails. So you can see we can enter all those details there. We also have this authentication checkbox here. If you need to authenticate when you're logging onto that server, you can check that box and enter username and password. Next we have FTP, which will allow us to set up an FTP server which we can transfer video to. Once we have that server configured, we also have a test button at the bottom there to test the connection. Then we have a CIFS button which will allow us to assign a CIFS location, so that's a network file location. Moving down, we have Firewall, which will allow us to do some basic filtering. So you can see we have some checkboxes there. We can block certain traffic. And then we have the Address Filtering tab, which allows us to do a couple of things. So you can see currently it's off. If I choose Allow, what that dialog is telling me is that any address which I add into this table here, they will be allowed access to the camera, and no other addresses will be. Deny is the opposite, so if I choose deny, I can enter IP or MAC addresses here to be denied access to the camera, and all other IP or MAC addresses will be allowed access. I'm just going to turn that off. If I move over then to the advanced settings, you'll see we have a few more tabs. So first of all, we have some remote access settings which we can set. We also have the HTTP and HTTPS communication settings there, and you can see we also have a field to upload a certificate if we're going to communicate securely. We then have the session timeout tab, which allows us to set a session timeout. So after that period of inactivity, the camera will be logged out. We have a slider there to set that. And then finally we have dynamic DNS settings if we need to enable that service.